Welcome back to Cinematic. I'm Ryan, and I'm making my way through a big old long list of action movies, Hong Kong and otherwise. You can find the list over on Letterboxd, link below, all that. And I know I said I was doing Angel Town this week. That didn't work out. It happens. This is a work in progress. But I traded it for an upgrade in every sense of the word. This is one of those episodes that is kind of the whole reason I started doing this in the first place, which pretty much makes up all of two types of movies. The ones I haven't seen, because then I get to learn a whole bunch and all that stuff, and it's super fun. But also the ones that I have seen and now get to rewatch with kind of new eyes, now 40 plus movies deep into this thing. Plus all the reading and research I get to do along the way. So I've got way more context, both chronologically but also culturally, when it comes to some of these movies I get to rewatch. But I was a kid in the 80s and 90s. So some of this is going to trickle down kind of in the way I talked about it trickling down in The Last Dragon. You know, the Kung Fu craze had kind of been around long enough that it was making its way into pretty much every type of media across all demographics. So when we talk about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie from 1990, keep in mind that those characters, those comics that the movie was based on, came about in 1984. So like smack dab in the middle of all that. It was the same year as Karate Kid. Last Dragon, I think, was the year after that. So the Turtles comics arguably more adult than either of those particular properties. But those of us that did live through the 80s and 90s might remember that, and this still goes on a little bit today, but the line between what was for kids and what was for adults, especially when it came to movies, was always like blurry in a really funny way. You know, like here's Aliens and RoboCop, which are absolutely R-rated movies, but also here's a whole line of children's toys as well. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie isn't all the way over on that end of the spectrum. You know, the cartoon and the toys had kind of already hit it big by the time this movie came out. So it's definitely more, speaking of the Turtles, it's more of a kid's property than anything, first and foremost at this point. But when the movie comes out in 1990 and is just way more adult and serious and just straight up better than it has any right to be, and I'm not the first 40-year-old white dude on YouTube to make such a bold artistic claim, but I do also want to place it within that context that I talked about a little bit, certainly within the context of all the movies I've watched up until this point. And as so happens with a lot of these, the best place to do that is with the people that made it happen. And again, like China O'Brien last week, I don't really have to go much farther than Golden Harvest. This was literally a Raymond Chow and Friends production, which, now that I think about it, this was the first Golden Harvest movie that I had ever seen. And it wasn't their first American production. I'm not actually sure what their first American production was. The internet didn't make it especially easy to look that up. In fact, if you go to Wikipedia, there's like an entire entry that's just a list of Golden Harvest productions. The only ones that they see fit to actually label as an English production is the Cannonball Run series, a Golden Harvest production, believe it or not, and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies. Also, okay, so I probably spent more time than I should have on that Wikipedia list of Golden Harvest productions, but apparently Hal Needham's follow-up to Cannonball Run was a movie called Megaforce, which looks like a Cannonball Run movie if it was injected with some sort of like pride-positive sci-fi steroids. And Robert Klaus made a Canadian horror film about giant killer rats called Deadly Eyes. So maybe spend some time on that Wikipedia list of Golden Harvest productions. It's pretty wild. But I'll tell you who you will see on many of those productions is a man by the name of Pat Johnson. 9th degree black belt in Tang Soo Do. Got hooked up with Chuck Norris pretty early on in his career. He was a stunt player in Enter the Dragon. I think he actually had some screen time too. I think he gets punched in the face by John Saxon at one point. He was also in Black Belt Jones. He was the stunt coordinator for Battle Creek Brawl, which I keep bringing up, but it was Robert Klaus's and kind of Jackie Chan's shot at the States back in 1980. And then Pat Johnson shows up literally on screen as the referee in the All Valley tournament in the first Karate Kid movie, which he would go on to be stunt coordinator and I think choreographer in the sequels, and then stunt coordinator for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And I skipped over a lot, and this isn't going to be the last time we talk about him, so Mortal Kombat. Also in this movie, Ernie Reyes Jr., although not technically on screen. You'll remember that promising young man from the Last Dragon movies that I talked about. I'm a big fan, have possibly been since the sequel to this movie, which we'll talk about. But he was in Donatello's suit doing all the martial arts for that particular turtle. So that kind of draws a dotted line between what we've seen and where we're going with this. But also, I'm not going to get away with making an episode about this movie without just talking about how stinking good the movie is. And I'm biased. Like, there's no way I can, like, objectively tell you all of these things. Like, this is easily one of the first movies I probably memorized, or at least can remember memorizing. You know, I'm sure there were some cartoons that I could have told you about backwards and forwards back in the day, but this movie, I've seen it so many times, saw it so many times when I was little, and I'm not even sure how. This had a huge life on VHS. I don't remember our family VHS tape of it when I was a kid, so I don't know exactly, but just every single beat and note I can. This was also one of the first albums I ever owned on cassette. And since it was a cassette, it's not like I was skipping through all of the movie score, you know? So I could sing to you John Dupres's Shredder's Suite just as well as Spunkadelic's 9.95. So fair warning on all of that. I will concede that quite possibly, it's not outside the realm of possibility that coming into this movie cold, maybe it doesn't hold up exactly as well. Like, for all of the gritty realism, you know, you still have to buy that Raphael can go about town unnoticed in just a hat and trench coat if need be. But I won't back down from the fact that I think the look of this thing, costumes included, holds up remarkably well. Like, even this is something that occurred to me this time around. I didn't remember there was even a scene with April it has been some years since I've watched this, let's say. I didn't remember the scene outright where April is walking after her first, we see her do her broadcast, and then she's going back to, I think, just her car, maybe her apartment, and she's wearing the yellow raincoat, which shouldn't look normal ever. And I don't remember that, like, taking me out of it or standing out. And even watching it now, it doesn't look absurd or anything like that. And I would extend that, to the turtle costumes we'll come back to, but also to even just the Foot Clan stuff. Like, that thing could have been bright purple, right? And it wasn't. You know, it was toned down for the most part. The bug eyes, I feel like, gave it just enough character. I just think the movie looks good, and I don't think it's me. There's no better review than one that sounds like you're defending yourself. I think I'm trying to say that I get that this movie is also just, like, super embedded in its time period. The Turtles, speaking of which, costumes were done by Jim Henson. And, like, I don't even know if I'm going to say this is, you know, peak practical effects or peak Jim Henson for that matter. I do think it's very Jim Henson in the way that he created, like, not puppets, but actual characters and concepts that were as real as any actor. But also, it's one of those things where you just, for me anyways, obviously you would have to have lived back then. You see it and you're instantly transported back to that exact time. Like, I can't think of another time in movie making history that's like that. I mean, there are, I'm sure, other examples of this, although I'd be curious if digital holds up in this way. You know, nostalgia is a heck of a thing. I'm sure there are kids that will, you know, that grew up or have some of their favorite movies in the 2000s where, you know, digital looked pretty digital. It's like post Jurassic Park, where they didn't get that was an additive thing, and they just started doing, like, entire characters? Was there a series that made entire characters digital? I wonder. But I'm curious if kids can look back on that and they're transported in the same way. I guess probably, yeah. But for me, it's Jim Henson. And certainly one of those is Jim Henson and his stuff for me, Robo Jim Henson included, which, these were all, don't go look up like what the masks and all the animatronics and stuff look like nowadays. Don't do it. Jim Henson could have made even darker movies than he did, it turns out. So anyway, this, I'll tell you what the anchor for all this is, that is kind of embodies a lot of what I'm talking about already, and it's Raphael in the movie. Whereas, any other kids movie would have done probably Leonardo, and this would have been something of a hero's journey. In fact, I want to say there are other Turtles movies and certainly properties that did go that way. But instead, here, they choose Raphael, and instead of the hero's journey, they chose existential dread, pretty much. And Raphael's like, it's super New York. I've probably not the one to, I've got a very outside looking in opinion of New Yorkers and whatnot. But to me, it seems like they really pressed on that with Raphael's character, both in attitude and even accent. Just stuff, that didn't show up in the cartoons even. I mean, he was cool but rude, but I don't even feel like any of them were really kind of New York coded. In fact, they seem more West Coast, all of them together, Michelangelo obviously included, but we're all dudes to some extent. So I don't know. The fact that the movie, and if you think I'm going like way too far down the rabbit hole already with this thing, you've got some time left on the video. You could duck out now, because I could go on about the direction. Like, I tried to source some of this. Obviously, Steve Barron is the director. I tried, oftentimes I'll try to go back and be like, oh, this makes sense because he went on to direct this, or, he was coming from this or something like that. Steve Barron continued, and I think continues to work a lot of television in there, but no other movies that I'm like, oh, this makes perfect sense necessarily. And I could say that for the cinematographer, John Fenner. A lot of this movie just seems like lightning in a bottle, because I'm not going to say any of it's bad. I don't think it is. Some of it's inexplicable in a way. Like, there are some excellent shots that you're just like, wow, that's a really brilliant and interesting thing to do with the camera that, like, I don't know why they did it necessarily, like what they were trying to communicate necessarily in that moment. So they might have just been like, this would be cool if we did this right then. And it is cool, even if like I can't find a deeper meaning, but I'm also not saying that's not there. And it's there in the look. Again, it's just way better looking, darker than it has any right to be. But also the performances, Judith Hoag, Elias Koteas, and the Turtles, all of the it's not motion capture. It wouldn't have been, they're literally in the suits. It's just literal motion, in fact, although it was captured on camera. But they're all great. It's like somebody came up to them and was like, you just have to make this martial arts movie with these things in it. And, had a great seed of an idea. And then at the end was like, and the main guys, those four guys, the four sons, they have to be huge human turtles. And the person who heard that just went, okay, yeah. And they're like, no, wait, but also in the middle, you're going to have to do like this flashback scene that's going to have some possible stop motion or additional puppetry in it. And the guy was like, yeah, great. Can we do it? Like, no question about just, I'm still going to make this awesome. And I know that's not necessarily how movies work, but given the amount of stuff that's in this one and how it still came out, again, I'm going to keep saying better than it has any right to be. Because it's not like there aren't more like Raphael in a trench coat moments in this. I just talked about the flashbacks, but like part of the explanation for Splinter is that he was already mimicking martial arts in his cage before he was mutated. So you got to go like the full nine with that. But okay, I know. It doesn't make any sense. But it's the fact that you can sail right past that stuff when watching this that I think makes all the difference and tells you that they were doing something more with it entirely. And I historically was not alone. This thing did make $202 million on a 13.5 million budget. It became the top grossing independent film of all time right then. Isn't anymore, obviously. In fact, it was eclipsed, I think, by the sequel at the time. This, although Golden Harvest did produce it, I believe it was, yeah, check out this list, actually. Disney, Columbia, Universal, MGM, Orion, 20th Century Fox, Paramount, and Warner Brothers all said no way to distribution, because in the Wikipedia sites, like, that they might have been scared about the performance of Masters of the Universe just a couple years prior. But the fact that all of those companies had no idea this thing was coming, but also that they couldn't quite reproduce it with the sequels. And like, I'm not going to spend as much time on the sequels, but I did watch them as well. I watched all 3 movies for this particular episode. I had considered doing more of a combo thing, but I'm not sure that I by the end of 2 and 3, I didn't have the notes to necessarily justify more time. And but I can boil it down because, and I can say this about both of the sequels, it just loses pretty much all of the grittiness and the darkness, quite like figuratively and literally, to the point where the seams start to show, also figuratively and literally. Like, you can see the delineation between the headpiece and the body, which I don't remember seeing when I was a kid, but watching them this time certainly, and maybe it's the whole 1080p and all that at this point, but you can see, and I don't remember seeing it at all, whether or not that's because it doesn't show or because the first movie wraps you up and everything else so well. But the seams start to show in the sequels. Also, there was that thing with Secret of the Ooze, which somebody had the idea that the first one was too violent or violent with weapons too much. There's a lot of weirdness going on. Obviously, the movies aren't violent. They're far less violent than any cartoon I was watching at the time, I'm sure, except for the Ninja Turtles cartoon, which was pretty tame. But the nunchucks were like outlawed in a whole bunch of spots. Like, those scenes had to be cut or changed in the UK because, and it was a bunch of moral panic nonsense, like, because they had become so popular with Bruce Lee and beyond. Obviously, this is 2 decades after Bruce Lee, just about. They had started outlawing them, even though they never were an issue criminally. Like, nobody was robbing the store with a pair of nunchucks, but whatever. Somebody had told them that the first one was too violent in that way. So weapons appear in the second movie, but they're very underutilized and they mostly fist fight instead. But I'll tell you what I didn't have a problem with in this. In fact, I'll just tell you all the good stuff from the sequel. Because I didn't even actually ever have a problem with Toka and Razor, for that matter. I know that was controversial, certainly at the time. I find it hilarious that, I think it was Laird, has this quote that's like, the reason why it wasn't Rocksteady and Bebop in that movie is because their constant one-note shtick in the first animated series was extremely annoying and silly to the point of being stupid, unquote. So instead, they created the not at all stupid or silly Toka and Razor characters, which, again, I don't mind, but they are referred to as stupid in the actual movie. Mama. Also, putting Ernie Reyes on screen, brilliant choice. Could have been on screen more, in fact, I will say, but the fact that they actually recognized that and put him in the actual film to any extent, I think was a great choice. Also, the actual action, which I haven't spoken too much about now, they're in suits. Obviously, it's not, you're not going to see anything like anything we've talked about so far, but I think it's pretty good for being in a suit. Like, they did more than a few things, again, watching it this time around, where I was like, yeah, it's pretty good for being in a huge rubber suit or latex suit or whatever it was. I think that in the second movie is at least as good as it was in the first movie. In fact, the opening scene where Ernie Reyes shows up as a pizza delivery boy and it foils a robbery, that then the turtles show up and there's a whole bunch of stuff. Pretty great opening sequence. It's, pretty broad comedy-wise, lots of slapsticky stuff in there, so it's right at home with just about any of the kung fu comedies we've watched so far. And I like the second Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, ninja rap included. I'll go that far. Find me a better 90s moment for a sequel, especially. It can't be done. The third movie was also a movie that came out. It was in theaters. You could go see it projected on a screen. 24 frames per second. It's a lot of frames per second. It brought back Casey Jones and then wasted it. But it brought him back. And it put the turtles in some samurai gear, which, you know, I'm pretty sure I had those toys as well. I just don't think, you know, the movie has its moments. It's not that I didn't smile, didn't laugh sometimes, but overall same issues, just way less dark, way less gritty. Just taking them out of the city, I don't know. Not a lot of it did it for me. And it's not that I'm, you know, I know this is a commonly held belief. I've given it a few chances. I did rewatch it again this time around, and it's probably the 4th or 5th time I've seen it in my life. And it's fine. You know, I'll let my kids watch it on repeat if they want, but I don't know that I'm going back. Oh, of course I am. I don't know. It's not as good as the other ones, but maybe I'm wrong on that too. Ninja Turtles 3 apologists, which I've heard in some territories, it was called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 Turtles in Time, which I would probably then have liked it. That's not true. I liked the video game a lot, but apologists, you want to give me a reason to like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3? Probably don't have to push me too hard. So come and find me. I hope this wasn't too much of a navel gazer. You know, I do think it's a good movie regardless. I do think I'm not alone regardless. I'm just always pleasantly surprised at how well it holds up. And again, for the 10th time, I'm sure it is better than it has any right to be. So if you agree, you can find me too, for that matter. We can go agree on stuff just as easily. Otherwise, you can look for me at patreon.com/Ryan_runs_, or there's a PayPal link also not too far if you want to get at the tip jar necessarily over there. Otherwise, you can come back. I'm reluctant now because I've so many times told you the movie I'm going to do next week and then ended up not doing that movie. So maybe that's just part of this. You know, maybe don't watch the movies in advance. That's what I'll say. Wait until the episode comes out, and then you know, if you're the type of guy that likes to, this is what I do. I watch the movie in advance and then I listen to the podcast. If that's the type of person you are, wait till the episode comes out, then watch the thing. Then you've got an episode of cinematic sitting there waiting for you. If everything goes smoothly, and I hope it does because I've heard great things about this and it has people that I've seen do great things already. Tiger Cage 2. So I think this is another one much like In the Line of Duty 4, where Yuan Wuping and Donnie Yen, I guess together, came into an existing franchise and did their magic. So I don't know anything about it beyond that. So come back next week where I figured that all out. And thank you, if I don't say that enough, thank you to the people's names you're going to see in just a second, but also thank you to anybody that watches for any amount of time. The people that are long gone at this point, the people that, you know, at least liked the thumbnail and watched for 2 seconds before moving on. As long as YouTube counts it, I count it.